It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch at filmseizure.com every Wednesday or at a number of podcast providers online. So here we are in the third week of our Silent Spooks celebration that is counting down to Halloween and the 200th episode of Monster Mondays, and this week it's an all-time classic. We're going to talk about 1925's The Phantom of the Opera, starring the one, the only, Lon Chaney. Now we'll talk more about Chaney here in just a moment, but the story of this movie begins in 1922 when president of Universal Pictures, Carl Laemmle, was in Paris and met with Gaston Leroux. Now, Leroux was working in the film industry at the time, and Laemmle expressed how much he liked the Paris Opera House. Finding this to be the perfect time for a little bit of self-promotion, Leroux handed Laemmle a copy of his book, The Phantom of the Opera. And I can picture Leroux saying to Laemmle something like, well, if you think this place is pretty cool, this will knock your socks off. And it did. Laemmle read Leroux's novel in one night and bought the film rights immediately. He thought this would be a pretty perfect vehicle for star Lon Chaney. And Laemmle hired writer Elliot J. Clausen to write the screenplay. Now, Clausen had a close working relationship with director Rupert Julian, who would be credited for the film as far as directing it. But more on that here in just a bit. Now, Clausen was immediately taken by the novel, and his first pass of the script was an incredibly close adaptation. The faithfulness was appreciated, but not really cinematic. It would require several rewrites and pass-throughs and punch-ups before making it to production. In all, the screenplay was said to have been written by 8 people, including Clausen. Everyone was uncredited, though I think it's safe to say that Clausen's the one who had the most of the stuff that made it to screen. Now, one of the most important features of the story would be the cavernous underbelly of the Paris Opera House that the Phantom resides in. It's an incredible set and amazingly intricate, and it had to be created almost from scratch, as Leroux's depiction of it in the novel was obviously much more imagination than reality. Yes, there's a cellar, but not like what we would see and not what was depicted in the book. This is what I think makes this a truly large motion picture that hadn't really been seen quite like this before. In order to properly create the scale and scope of the setting, the Paris Opera House, Laemmle commissioned the construction of Soundstage 28, the fabled Phantom of the Opera stage. Sadly, just 3 months after Carla Laemmle, the last surviving member of the production, passed away, Soundstage 28 was completely demolished, having served up until that time as the oldest surviving set and stage dedicated for a specific production in film history, surviving pretty close to 90 years. Famously, the 1925 version of The Phantom of the Opera stars one Leonidas Frank Chaney, Lon to his friends, and Lon Chaney was a huge star by his mid-20s, having appeared in a ton of short subjects and feature films, which almost all of which are lost to time, with only a few of them having survived throughout the decades. Now, once you get into the 20s, you start finding some of his films that did end up surviving. In 1923, he played Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame and really showed off his stunt and athletic prowess, as well as his makeup skills. We all know that Chaney was known as, quote, the man of 1,000 faces because of how many film roles he'd have that required his face to be significantly changed or hidden under incredibly sophisticated makeup. Chaney's acting abilities blossomed because he had one of the greatest upbringings to eventually become a silent film star. He was the hearing child of deaf parents. He learned and became quite skilled as a pantomime because of that. And by the early part of the 20th century, Chaney was a member of popular vaudeville acts, and he eventually became a contract player, though mostly in bit parts, for Universal in the teens. And he appeared in 10 films for Todd Browning, which meant that as Universal was ramping up to film Dracula with Todd Browning directing that, it was said that Chaney would have been offered the role as the Count, but he got sick and was diagnosed with fairly aggressive lung cancer. Of course, Chaney's London After Midnight from 1927 did feature the star as a vampire, but that is a lost film that is considered by many to be the holy grail of all the lost films. Now, I could easily go on forever about Chaney, but let's shift over to the production of The Phantom of the Opera, which was not a great time. Director Rupert Julian and star Lon Chaney had a horrific relationship, no pun intended. The two bickered constantly, and eventually they stopped speaking to each other. Julian was mad that Chaney would just do whatever the hell he wanted regardless of direction. Chaney would receive direction from a go-between that the two men used to communicate, and the star would just shoot back, tell him to go to hell. Now, this was one of those things about movies. This is art from adversity. Anymore, a lot of behind-the-scenes features about movies paint this almost rosy picture of how well everyone got along on the set, because they were doing all this for the adoring audience, and that's not really how anything works in art. Some days, practical effects aren't going to work so well. Sometimes actors get moody. Sometimes directors demand a lot. Sometimes things are just not working out that well, and it gets on everyone's nerves because artists are all perfectionists and weirdos, right? But oftentimes, when you have the right mixture of the right kinds of adversity on set, magical things can happen. And with that, let's talk about all the stuff that happens in the magical movie, The Phantom of the Opera. The movie opens with a new season opening up at the magnificent Paris Opera House. Now, this opens with a ballet version of the classic German tale of Faust. Bookmark Faust for just a moment. We'll come back around to that by the end of this episode. But the dancers are dancing perfectly. The orchestra is cacophonous in their melody. Elsewhere, we see two men selling the deed of the opera house to its new owners. After the deal is complete, the former owners say to the new guys that they likely won't hear the murmurs of the dreaded Phantom of the Opera. The new owners laugh it off, despite the old owners stating that the occupant of Box 5 certainly does not laugh when mention of the Phantom is made. So the new owners ask about who occupies that box, but all is known about this person is a cloaked man who hides his face and stays to the shadows. The new owners go to check this out, see the cloaked man, and recoil in horror. When they get the nerve to speak to the man, he has disappeared mysteriously. Backstage, the various dancers, as part of this production, spot the Phantom and try to explain what they saw. However, even these girls aren't able to keep their story straight. One says he had no nose. Another says he did, and it was huge. It's a lot of people just being spooked by the legend itself. Even the man who everyone says has seen the Phantom is kind of hamming it up. Two beady eyes that look like holes in the person's skull. His skin is leprous and yellow, and no, he doesn't have a nose. However, the Phantom has made a threat. His beloved Christine must sing the song Marguerite, or else it will prove disastrous to the prima donna's career. Surely enough, on the date he demanded, the prima donna of the opera house, Madame Carlotta, has gone ill, and Christine has her big moment of stardom. Christine's boyfriend, Raoul, is proud of Christine's achievement, even if his brother is a little curious if maybe her sudden rise to stardom has come with some rumors about how strong Raoul and her love might be. Raoul thinks that now that she's realized her ambition of starring in the big opera, they can go off and become married. But she's not on the same page here. Her first love is the opera. Also, there's a voice from behind the walls that speaks to Christine and tells her how he made this all possible. Raoul, just outside her door, hears it too. And the voice tells Christine that he will make her a star, but she must forget all worldly things and focus only on her career and him. In time, this benefactor will come for her and command her love. And Christine agrees. This man seems to have power over her by granting her the stardom and popularity that she desires in the opera. The Phantom again demands that Madame Carlotta be ill for the next evening's performance of Faust. Her career is threatened. The new owners of the opera house is threatened by a curse if they do not comply with this wish as well. Carlotta decides to defy the order and performs, and Christine sends a note during the performance to Raoul, who wishes to see her again, that he must never attempt to contact her again for reasons that she cannot explain. As Carlotta is performing, the Phantom strikes by making the giant chandelier fall into the audience, killing several attendees. Christine is guided to a secret passage behind her mirror in her dressing room, and she meets the Phantom, who introduces himself as Eric and that he loves her. Feeling trapped by the strange man who guided her down 5 cellars below the opera house, and who, as she discovers, uses a coffin as a bed, Christine is not really sure about all this, so she faints. She awakens to find several items left for her, as if she's expected to live in these catacombs forever. A note is left for her by the Phantom to say that she will never be in peril as long as she never touches Eric's mask. Instead, she is to love the spirit that is the Eric he was and never look upon what he has become. She hears beautiful organ music and follows it to the Phantom, who's playing this beautiful organ and this beautiful tune. Curious at what he's playing, she looks over his shoulder, but he closes the music and kind of guards it. And he only says that ever since he first laid eyes on her, the music sang to him and represented love, but there's also something ominous under it. Hearing this part of the music, Christine cannot help but pull the Phantom's mask off his face. His true monstrous visage is revealed, and he points at her to scold her for doing the one thing she was never meant to do, and one of the most iconic moments in all of cinema is unveiled. Now, Christine begs for forgiveness and to be let go. She says that if he lets her back to the surface, she'll be his slave forever, but she cannot remain in the cellars. Saddened, he agrees. However, she is still his, and he will continue to give her opportunities to sing at the opera. Christine says that she must see Raoul again, but to be careful because she will not be alone. She knows the Phantom will be nearby. So she tells Raoul that she will be found at the masquerade ball. In a painstakingly hand-dyed sequence, the entire ball is in color to show off the colorful costumes of the partygoers. The Phantom arrives in a red costume with a skull mask from the Mask of the Red Death, and he knows that Raoul is there, and he follows Christine and Raoul to the roof of the building, where she tells her old lover that she's seen the Phantom and that he is a monster. She will take Carlotta's place in Faust, and they pretty much have to run away together after the next performance. They make plans to take off for England the very next night, and the Phantom, heartbroken, bemoans being betrayed by his beautiful Belle. The next day, Raoul prepares for a carriage to take he and Christine away as soon as the next performance is over. She performs as to be expected, but soon the Phantom starts messing with the actual production, as the director is snatched by the Phantom, and then he kidnaps Christine. While all this is going on, Ledoux, a man with the secret police, knows who the Phantom is, a man who is a brilliantly self-taught musician, but also an escapee from an insane asylum. He helps Raoul chase after the Phantom into the cellars. Elsewhere, the Phantom chastises Christine for lying to him and trying to make off with Raoul. Ledoux and Raoul get close, but they end up falling into a trap. And unfortunately, Raoul's brother has gone looking for him, which alerts the Phantom to there being intruders. The Phantom attacks and drowns Raoul's brother, and while he slowly makes his way back to his home, Christine attempts to find a door or a set of keys that can free Ledoux and Raoul from their trap. When the Phantom realizes that he's caught the two men, he turns on a I don't know if it's like a heat lamp or if it's just a way to strike up a fire, but it makes the room that the men are trapped in unbearably hot. Outside, hundreds of denizens of Paris have realized where the Phantom hides and plan to avenge the people that he's killed. The Phantom sees that Ledoux has discovered the exit to the torture chamber, and where the men believe they've escaped, they are nearly drowned by yet another machination of the Phantom. The Parisians invade in force, and the Phantom grabs Christine and leaves, and Raoul and Ledoux and the mob chase after them. Eventually they catch up to the Phantom, and the mob beats him to death. Christine and Raoul are reunited and apparently will live happily ever after. So let's talk about those three things I like about the 1925 version of the Phantom of the Opera. First, this movie is glorious to look at. The opening shot of the movie is this wonderful matte painting of the exterior of the opera house, and it's integrated so well with people walking up the steps to enter and to watch Faust. Then the inside is just magnificent. You know you're seeing something special watching this movie. It's not shot on location. It's using the real it's not using the real Paris Opera House. It's been recreated in spectacular detail. It's lively. It's as large as an opera house. It's a movie that does not look cheap at all. You're really watching something special, and you know it. You can feel it in the visuals. Carl Laemmle obviously not only fell in love with the Paris Opera House, but also the story, and he seemingly refused to cut any corners to bring this to life for this adaptation. Then when you get into the cellars, it's a whole nother world and creates a second feeling you have while watching this movie. And that's what my second point here of my 3 likes for this movie. This movie is drenched in atmosphere. This is the whole other feeling you get when watching this movie. Above the Phantom cellar, the film uses tinting and almost has this air of life and vibrant activity. Pinks and blues and yellows soak the film. However, when you get all the way down to the Phantom's level, he lives in a world with absolutely no color. There's light, but it's just straight black and white that you see. He's a sad, lonely monster whose world is completely devoid of life. While Christine, who's played by Mary Philbin, is one ray of beauty in this drab and sad world, even she's colorless when trapped in the Phantom's lair. The way the cellars are shot is just simply fantastic. You actually feel the chill and the smell of the underground water that flows through the bottom layer. It's a perfect series of sets to really enjoy the Halloween season with. That's the kind of atmosphere you get. It just has that chill in the air, just like fall does. Third, I mean, come on, it's Lon Chaney, right? Lon Chaney is amazing to watch in the movie. The way Chaney emotes in this movie is just fantastic. Even when he's dressed as the Red Death, you can feel what he's trying to portray, even though his face is completely covered by that skull mask. You don't get the impression that he's necessarily towering over anyone, but he's such a presence that he really is like a phantom hanging over the whole movie. And one of the things I want to point out here, his typical mask that he's wearing in this is not like the one you commonly think of when you hear the title The Phantom of the Opera. What's used in the immensely popular stage musical is actually closer to the mask worn by Claude Rains in the full-color remake from 1943 than the one that Chaney wears. Chaney's is very disturbing, much more so because basically it's just the top half of a face with painted on eyes and that just kind of stare awkwardly. It's unsettling. The bottom of the mask has this narrow line of cloth that sucks in and blows out when he speaks. He just looks off, and like I said, it's unsettling and it's truly iconic. That's a term that gets tossed around a lot, but here with Lon Chaney as the Phantom of the Opera, it is well earned, and nearly 100 years later, still a truly special performance. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. We're only 2 weeks away from Monster Mondays number 200. So to appropriately set up that 200th, let's do two from the same director. Next week, Monster Mondays number 199 goes back to Germany for that classic tale about a demon's attempt to corrupt a righteous man's soul that we did mention earlier as I talk about F.W. Murnau's 1926 version of Faust. So until next week, stay spooky.